Hi there, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the August 2022 My Creative Scrapbook Limited Edition kit. I have been trying to catch up on some videos lately. I have completed a number of layouts, but I did not complete the accompanying videos, and that's something that I'm concentrating on. At the beginning of the month, I decided I needed to take a little bit of a break from creating pages just to kind of refresh my creative spirit. For the last few weeks, I've been working on editing and doing voiceovers for my videos, and I'm hoping that I'll feel refreshed and ready to scrapbook again because I have a scrapbooking retreat coming up fairly soon. When I started making this layout, I was at a scrapbooking retreat. I had my August kit, or what was left of it after making quite a few layouts. I had quite a few embellishments and some pattern papers left. I decided to use these two photos that I took quite a few years ago in 2016. I was at Eastern State Penitentiary with my family, and I absolutely love going on trips there. We've been there several times. There was just something about the papers and the embellishments in this collection that I thought would go really well with these photos. One of the first embellishments that I chose for the layout were these green frames. The opening in them measures approximately 3 inches by 3 inches, so that's the size of my photos. And then I took a number of these cards or layering pieces that I had, and I began to layer them behind the frames. I'm going to put one frame on one side of the layout and the other frame on the other side of the layout. I want the frames to coordinate, but I'm not going to match them exactly, so I want to use some of the same elements on both photos. I'm layering a red journaling card behind the photo on the right. To the left of the layout, you could see that I have a little pile of neutral colored cards that I'm going to be using to layer behind the photos. On top of that, you could see that I have a number of embellishments. I'm going to be using those a little bit later on to finish off the layout. I totally forgot to bring my distress ink in vintage photo to this crop, so my friend Sue loaned me another ink. I used her Archival Ink. The color is called Potting Soil. I placed a tab on each of the clusters. On the cluster on the left, which I'm working on now, I have a chipboard tag, and then I have that card right next to it that has the paper clip on it. I also put a piece of heavy cardstock behind the whole cluster, and that's just to give the photo a little bit of weight, just to make it a little bit more sturdy. And then I used some fun foam and I popped the photo up, but I do continue adding layers even though I've already put the foam behind the cluster. It definitely would have made more sense to wait until the end, till I was done layering, to put the foam on the cluster, but it worked out fine. I also added some embellishments at the top of the photo. I have some mushrooms, and I think that those mushrooms are super cute. It was one of my favorite things about this paper collection. And then I start to add layers behind the photo that's going to go on the right side of the layout. So far, I've layered a red card and then an off-white card behind the photo, and I sometimes will cut the layering pieces in smaller bits just because only a tiny bit of those cards is going to show, and I never know what other layouts I'm going to make with a kit, or I might end up using the cards on this layout, and you never know when you're going to need a certain color, so I always try to conserve these gorgeous papers. I have another mushroom embellishment, so I decided to put that on the photo on the right. Right now I have the mushrooms on the right-hand side, but I end up moving that around a little bit. And then I was thinking that I should add a little bit of yellow to this cluster since I have some yellow in the other cluster. So again, I cut a small piece and I layer it on the top of the photo. I'm starting to have a lot of layers on the right-hand side, and I don't have any red on the left-hand side, so I was thinking that I would work a little bit of red into that cluster. Once I added a touch of red at the top of the cluster, I decided that I would go ahead and attach down those mushrooms, which I had just placed there before. And then I decided that I wanted to add some of that red card to the bottom of the cluster as well, just to build up a similar number of layers on this cluster that I have on the other cluster. I find with clusters, it just takes a lot of trial and error. Sometimes the slightest little movement of one of the layers can make a big difference in the appearance of the whole cluster. So I usually do take a little bit of time to try things in different positions. I mean, I always like to see what the options are, which is probably why I take so long to scrapbook and why I'm always attaching things down to the page and then removing them. I remember years ago, before I had ever made a cluster like this with all of the different layers, I was watching Kat Martin, who is an amazing scrapbooker. I don't know if she's still making videos, but she has some fantastic layering on her layouts. And I remember watching her and thinking that looks really hard to do. And it did take me a little bit of practice before I could figure out exactly what my style of layering was. Just like I did with the other layer, I cut a piece of cardstock down to size and then I attach it behind the cluster. And that not only makes the cluster a little bit more sturdy for when I pop it up on some foam, but it also holds all of those layers together really well. Of course, I had to add a little bit more layering, and I'm not done moving things around yet. I added a little white card underneath the mushrooms on the right-hand side. I don't love the way it looks with the mushrooms layered right on top of it, but I do change things around in a bit. Now I'm going to start working on my title, which is going to go on the bottom of the page. I'm using this chipboard piece that says Discover, and I think that is a great title to use with these photos. I go back to the title cluster in a little while, but I also wanted to add some butterflies to each of the clusters. I have a red one and a yellow one, and those move around a little bit, but I do end up keeping the red one on the cluster on the right and the yellow one on the cluster on the left. I found I had a few more mushrooms. These are single mushrooms, so I layered them on top of each other. I put a little bit of foam on the smaller mushroom just to create a little dimension in that spot, and then I moved those butterflies around a little bit. I'm attaching down the mushroom cluster that's on the photo on the right-hand side. I decided to move it to the left-hand side of the photo though, and I was thinking that because I have the mushrooms on the other photo on the right-hand side, it would look better if these photos were on the left-hand side, just to make sure that the mushrooms are balanced. I used 2 small buttons from the chipboard pack. I put one on each of the clusters. On the right-hand side, I put it on the bottom. On the left-hand side, I put it on the top. Now I'm going to cut a little slit in the bottom of the page and I'm going to fold that paper back. I wanted to be careful that I cut the paper in the correct place, so I made sure to use a ruler and then a T-square to draw the line going up, and then I cut very carefully along the line. I did not want to waste this piece of pattern paper. I'm layering a journaling card behind that opening that's now in the paper. Later on though, I'm going to go back and I'm going to switch that out for a different colored card. I used my scissors and I distressed the edges of those 2 triangles that I had cut. And I think this is a great layout to use a little bit of distressed paper on. I attached the 2 flaps down to the page and then I layered the title over the top. I pulled off the backing a little bit roughly, so I had to go back and add a little bit of adhesive to get that white part of the backing to stay attached down. And then I positioned the title and then I pressed it into place. I wanted to have some butterflies kind of flying around the title, so I picked out 2 green butterflies. They're 2 different shades of green, and one is a chipboard piece and the other one is a die cut piece. And I popped up the wings of the die cut piece, and then I ended up switching out the chipboard butterfly for another die cut butterfly. I found that I had another red one, and I thought that the red and green looked nice together by the title. I was thinking that that would be the end of the layout, but I just thought it looked a little bit too plain. So when I got back from my scrapbooking getaway, I took that same piece of pattern paper and I gessoed it with some clear gesso. And now I'm going to add some mixed media to the background. I start off with this My Creative Scrapbook stencil and some Liquitex modeling paste. I drew pencil lines around where those photo clusters are going to go on the layout, and that helped to guide me as to where to put the modeling paste on the background. I put the modeling paste down and then I used my palette knife and I scraped away a little bit of the modeling paste just so that the edge of where the modeling paste is would look a little irregular. I didn't want it to look too straight. When I said this was a My Creative Scrapbook stencil, I meant that we received it in one of the My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kits. I believe that this is a Vicky Boutin stencil, and over the months we've gotten a lot of these gorgeous Vicky Boutin stencils in the limited edition kit. I continued adding small areas of the modeling paste around the layout. I have the two big areas with lots of stenciling, and then I wanted to have a few more kind of random areas so that the modeling paste would look a little bit random and not so symmetrical. I've scrapbooked quite a few pictures of Eastern State Penitentiary before. It's located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it's a very large penitentiary. It was built and opened in the 1800s, and it was closed down, but now you can go visit it, and it is quite amazing. I, first of all, feel like you cannot take a bad picture in there. Everything is so interesting, and something about the lighting just makes it easy to take some pretty cool photos. We've been to Eastern State Penitentiary several times now, and between all of our family members, we have taken quite a few pictures. The main building has been preserved, but there's also a whole lot of decay, and it makes for some really interesting photos. I would definitely recommend going there if you're ever in the Philadelphia area. I had a little spot where I added some modeling paste and I decided to remove it. I was able to scrape it off rather easily, and that was probably because I have that layer of the clear gesso over the whole sheet of pattern paper. When I placed the photos back in their spots, I realized I wanted to add a little bit more modeling paste to the layout. I added just a little bit more modeling paste under the photo on the left-hand side. And then I was thinking that it would be nice to have a little spot at the top of the layout, and I added a little bit of modeling paste there as well. Next, I'm going to add some sprays to the modeling paste. The modeling paste is fully dry at this time. I'm adding some Tattered Angels Glimmer Mists. I use 3 different colors: lime lustre, patina green, and golden forest. I'm trying to be very careful about not overdoing it with adding color. I find that a pattern paper background coated with clear gesso is not as forgiving as a piece of white cardstock that's coated with white gesso. So I try to be very conservative about adding color. I can always go back and add more color, but it's very difficult to remove color on a piece of pattern paper. I find you can lighten up the color a little bit if you want to add some water to the background, but it's not at all like when I have a piece of white cardstock that is coated with white gesso. I feel like I can add color, remove color, and add more color very easily. On the majority of the background, I use the packaging technique, but I wanted to be a little bit more precise with my color application than I would be able to get with the plastic. So I decided to use a paintbrush for some of the areas on the bottom where I wanted to add some color. Here I place the clusters on the background. I like to do that several times while I'm making the mixed media background. I really don't think there's any other way to be sure if the color is in the correct places. Now I'm adding some white splatters to the background, and just like with the sprays, I'm trying to be a little bit more controlled than I usually am. I really don't want to overdo the white splatters. I want to concentrate them on the areas that I've already put some sprays on. When I put the clusters on top of the background, it looked to me like I needed the color to be a little bit more intense. A lot of the color that you see here is going to be covered up, and just a little bit is going to be visible around the edge of each of those photo clusters. So I wanted to add a little bit more intensity to each of those areas. So I added another layer of the green sprays in a few areas. And then I used the paintbrush and I added some green splatters, again, trying to get the splatters mainly where the green paint is. Next, I go in with one of my favorite techniques, which is splattering a little bit of water over the top of the layout and then using a paper towel to remove some of the color. It doesn't have a huge effect when you use clear gesso. It makes much more of effect when there's white gesso in the background, but I still wanted to try because I really love that technique so much. I go in again with another layer of the white splatters. And I wanted to point out that whenever I add white splatters to the background, I always make sure that the background is dry, because if you add white splatters and the background is wet, the splatters don't look as crisp. You can't see the circles as well. They will diffuse into the background a little bit. I'm not done with the background right now, but I don't know that at this point, so I attach both of the clusters down to the background with some ATG adhesive. And once I'm totally done with the layout and I'm sure that everything is where I want it, I will go back in afterwards and I'll add some gel glue to make sure that those clusters stay attached down. I go back in with a few splatters of Distress ink in ground espresso, and I use a small paintbrush and I splatter those in the background. The splatters are very faint, but I think it added a little bit of something to the background. I always love adding various colors and various layers in the background. I think every little bit makes a difference. So now I am taking up each of the clusters and I am adding some stamping. I'm using some Staz On Ink and this really old rubber stamp that I bought at a flea market. It has script on it. I love it. I use it all the time, and I'm using it right now and adding some stamping both behind the cluster on the right and then also on the areas of color by the title, and then at the top of the page as well. I also do a little bit of stamping with a Stampin' Up dot stamp. I add a little bit more of that script writing, and then I place the right-hand cluster back where it was, and then I do the same thing on the other side of the layout with the stamps. I cut out some of that footage just because the video is getting a little long, and I did the same thing on the left that I did on the right. Now I'm adding some twine to the tag at the top of the cluster on the left. That's a brown and off-white twine. I trimmed down the twine a little bit after I had cut it, and then I decided that I wanted to change out that card that was on the bottom of the layout, and I switched it out for a yellow card. That was the last touch on the layout, and here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I really appreciate you sticking it out till the very end. This was kind of a longer video and a little bit of a different style than you usually see me doing, but I really enjoyed making this layout, and I hope you enjoyed watching the video. This layout was made using the August 2022 kit. You can see all of the latest My Creative Scrapbook kits on their website, and the link is in the description box. I hope you have a fantastic day, everybody. Take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.